The night Eleanor Ashford found the second baby, the storm outside Thornfield Hall was so fierce that the windows shook like frightened creatures trying to escape the wind. Thunder rolled across the sky, deep and angry, and for a moment she wondered if the house itself was mourning something it could not name. That was the night she learned that some secrets are not meant to be uncovered, but inherited, passed from one broken heart to another. But the story did not begin that night. It began months earlier, on a cold gray morning in February, when Eleanor stood in a churchyard and watched the earth swallow everything she loved. She was only 23 when she buried her husband and her son on the same day. Thomas had been a clerk, kind and gentle, with warm hands and a laugh that made even the smallest room feel alive. Their son William had lived only 4 months, just long enough for Eleanor to learn the exact weight of him in her arms, just long enough to know the shape of his tiny fingers wrapped around hers when he slept. Fever took them both within a single week. When the rain began to fall onto their graves, Eleanor felt as if something inside her had been buried with them. For 6 months she lived as if she were already halfway gone herself. She mended clothes for village women. She ate when she remembered. She slept only when exhaustion forced her to, because waking meant remembering, and remembering hurt more than the numbness. The cradle in the corner of her cottage stayed empty. The space beside her in bed stayed cold. It was Mrs. Peden, the vicar's wife, who finally broke through Eleanor's fog of grief. She came one August afternoon and sat at Eleanor's small table, her untouched tea growing cold between her hands. "You cannot go on like this, Eleanor," she said, firm but not unkind. "You are young, and there is a child who needs someone like you." "A child," she explained. The Duke of Blackwood's daughter, 3 months old. The Duchess had died in childbirth. The Duke had dismissed 4 nursemaids already. The baby cried constantly and could not be soothed. "They say she needs a mother's touch," Mrs. Peden said quietly. "And you have love that has nowhere to go." The words were blunt, but they were true. Eleanor's love had not died with her son. It had turned inward, heavy and aching, waiting for somewhere to land. 3 days later, Eleanor left the village she had known her entire life. Her single trunk sat behind the hired carriage as the road curved away and the cottages disappeared from view. She did not cry. Her grief was already packed inside her chest. Thornfield Hall rose from the land like something both grand and grim. Gray stone walls, ivy clinging like desperate hands, dark windows staring down as if watching her arrival. It did not feel like a home. It felt like a place full of echoes. Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper, met her at the servants' entrance. Her iron gray hair was pulled tight, her eyes sharp and tired. "You are the new governess," she said flatly. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, ma'am, Eleanor Ashford. The child is in the East Wing nursery. You will take your meals there. His Grace does not wish to be disturbed. You are not to approach him unless summoned." Her heels clicked across marble floors as she led Eleanor through endless corridors lined with portraits of long-dead ancestors who all seemed to frown in judgment. The others were dismissed because they could not keep the child quiet, Mrs. Crawford added. "His Grace does not tolerate disruption." Eleanor said nothing. She was here to serve. The nursery lay at the end of a long hallway, and Eleanor heard the crying before the door was opened. Not the soft fussing of a restless baby, but the raw, exhausted sobs of a child who had cried too long. Lady Isabel lay in a carved mahogany cradle, red-faced and furious. The room was beautiful in a distant way, pale blue walls, lace curtains, a fire burning low. Everything expensive, everything cold. Mrs. Crawford gestured once. "She has been fed and changed. She will not settle. Perhaps you will succeed where the others failed." Then she left, closing the door behind her. Eleanor stood frozen. It had been months since she last held a baby, since the morning William died. Finally, she stepped forward and looked down at Isabel. The child's fists waved angrily, her cries sharp and desperate. But when her gray blue eyes opened and met Eleanor's, something changed Just for a breath, the crying faltered. "Oh, little one," Eleanor whispered, "you are not alone here." She lifted the baby into her arms, and the weight felt painfully right. Isabel's cries softened, then faded as Eleanor rocked her gently. The rhythm was the same. The instinct was the same. By the time Eleanor laid her back in the cradle, the baby slept peacefully. Eleanor felt no triumph, only grief. This child was not hers, would never be hers, and yet her heart was already reaching for her. Still, she stayed. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor learned Isabel's needs, her cries, the way she liked to rest her head against Eleanor's shoulder. The Duke remained a distant presence. Sometimes Eleanor saw him from afar, a tall figure crossing the courtyard, a shadow at a window. Once, late at night, she saw him standing by the lake, perfectly still, staring at the water, as if waiting for something to rise from it. Then came the storm. It was near midnight. Isabel slept peacefully. Eleanor dozed in a chair beside the cradle when a sound woke her, a baby crying. Not Isabel. The sound was faint, carried by wind and thunder, but unmistakable. Eleanor checked the cradle. Isabel slept on, undisturbed. The crying came from the far end of the hall. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the dark corridor. The sound grew louder as she walked. The door at the end was unlocked. Inside, a small room held a simple cradle and a single candle. And in that cradle lay a baby boy. He cried with desperate strength, dark hair damp with sweat, cheeks wet with tears. A young servant girl sat beside him, pale and shaking. "Please," the girl whispered, "do not tell anyone. I cannot quiet him." Before Eleanor could speak, the door behind her opened. "Mrs. Ashford," a deep voice said, "I see you have discovered my secret." The Duke of Blackwood stood there, rain clinging to his dark hair, his face pale and rigid. Lightning split the sky behind him. "Care for him," he said softly, "as you care for Isabel, but please do not ask who his mother is." His hands trembled. Eleanor looked at the crying child, at the man carrying a grief too heavy for one heart. "What is his name?" she asked. The Duke closed his eyes. "James." And in that moment, Eleanor knew her life at Thornfield Hall would never again be simple. From the night Eleanor agreed to care for James, Thornfield Hall changed in ways she could not explain. The house did not grow warmer or brighter, yet something in it softened, as if the walls themselves were listening more closely. 2 cradles now stood side by side in the nursery, and Eleanor sat between them through long nights, rocking one child while the other slept, learning how to divide her heart without breaking it. James was different from Isabel. Where Isabel cried sharply and then settled, James cried as if afraid the world might forget him if he stopped. He was heavier in Eleanor's arms, stronger even as an infant, and when he finally slept, his hand always clutched at her gown as if afraid she might vanish. Eleanor felt the same old ache return, the memory of William's grip, but now it no longer crushed her. It gave her purpose. The Duke kept his distance. Days passed without a word from him, yet his presence was everywhere. Extra coal appeared in the nursery fireplace. Better food arrived on Eleanor's tray. A thick shawl lay folded on her chair one morning without explanation. He was watching, waiting, testing whether she would keep her promise. She did. She asked no questions. She told no one. When servants whispered, she heard only fragments, rumors without shape. Some said the Duke had taken a village girl as a mistress. Others hinted at darker things. Eleanor ignored them all. Her loyalty belonged to the children first. Mary, the young servant who had been caring for James in secret, often lingered in the nursery at night. She was awkward with the baby, afraid of doing something wrong. "I never wanted to hide him," Mary whispered once, tears in her eyes, "but His Grace said it must be so." "You did what you were told," Eleanor replied gently. "That is not shame." As weeks passed, James moved fully into the main nursery. Isabel and James grew used to each other's presence, sleeping in the same rhythms, crying at the same moments, as if they had always been together. Eleanor watched them and felt something close to peace. It was in late October that Eleanor spoke properly with the Duke for the first time. She had taken the children to the library, a quiet room filled with dust and sunlight, and sat reading while they slept in baskets at her feet. When she looked up, the Duke stood by the fireplace, watching her. "I did not mean to intrude," he said. She rose at once. "Your Grace." "They look well," he said, his gaze fixed on the children. "They are," Eleanor replied. "They grow stronger every day." A silence settled between them, heavy, careful. "You have asked me nothing," he said at last. "About the boy." "You asked me not to," Eleanor said, "so I did not." He studied her as if trying to understand how she existed. "You lost a child," he said quietly. "Yes, and my husband." "I am sorry," he said, and she heard real understanding in his voice. She hesitated, then said softly, "And I am sorry for your wife." Pain crossed his face. "Catherine wanted Isabel more than anything," he said. "She knew the risk. I did not stop her." Eleanor said nothing. Some grief had no comfort. When he left, her heart beat faster than it should have. She told herself it was only sympathy, only shared loss. Then came Lady Hartwell. She arrived without warning, sweeping into the nursery with sharp eyes and sharper judgment. She was beautiful in a hard way, her posture perfect, her gaze cutting. "So," she said, "you are the woman my brother has hidden away." "I am Eleanor Ashford," Eleanor replied calmly. "I care for the children." "Children?" Lady Hartwell repeated, her eyes flicking to James's cradle. "Interesting." Eleanor did not rise to the challenge. "Any questions should be directed to His Grace." Lady Hartwell stared at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "You are not what I expected." That night, Eleanor sensed change in the air. Something was moving beneath the surface of Thornfield Hall. 3 nights later, Eleanor found a letter slipped under the nursery door. No name, only a message. "If you wish to understand the child you care for, come to the chapel at midnight. Come alone." Her hands shook as she folded it. She should have burned it. Instead, she waited until the house slept and stepped into the cold night. The chapel stood apart from the house, stone and silent. Inside, candles burned. Lady Hartwell waited near the altar. Beside her stood a woman Eleanor did not know, her face worn with grief. "This is Anne Pembroke," Lady Hartwell said. "My sister-in-law's lady's maid." Mrs. Pembroke's voice trembled. "The Duchess did not die giving birth to Isabel alone." Eleanor listened as the truth unfolded, each word cutting deeper than the last. Catherine's younger sister, Margaret. Disgraced, ill, dying, a baby born in secret, a promise made on a deathbed. "The boy is not my brother's son," Lady Hartwell said. "He is his nephew, and my brother chose to be thought unfaithful rather than let that child be shamed." The Duke's grief suddenly made sense, his silence, his desperation. Eleanor returned to the house shaken, but certain of one thing. She would stay. Days passed in quiet tension. Lady Hartwell remained, watching Eleanor with new eyes. She spoke gently now, not as an enemy, but as an ally. "He cannot marry within his class now," Lady Hartwell said one afternoon. "Too much scandal, too many whispers." Eleanor kept her gaze on the children. "That is not my concern." "Perhaps it should be," Lady Hartwell replied. The Duke summoned Eleanor to his study in early December. He paced like a man on trial. "My sister told you," he said. "You know." "Yes." "And still you stayed." "Yes." Quote, "Why?" "Because you kept a promise," Eleanor said, "and because those children need love, not truth wrapped in cruelty." He knelt before her then, a duke brought low by hope. "I cannot offer you respect in society," he said, "only honesty and devotion." Her heart raced. "You want to marry me?" "I do." She said yes before fear could stop her. They married quietly 3 weeks later, no celebration. Only vows spoken honestly. The scandal came quickly. Letters, whispers, cold stares. Eleanor endured them all. Then came the blackmail letter. A man claiming to be James's father, demanding money, threatening exposure. Eleanor did not hesitate. "Then we tell the truth ourselves." The Duke feared the cost. Eleanor feared the lie. They wrote the letters, sent them, waited. The truth did not destroy them. Some condemned them. Others praised their courage. The blackmailer vanished. For the first time, Thornfield Hall breathed freely. Years passed. Isabel learned to walk. James followed. They grew side by side, unaware of the weight their beginnings carried. And Eleanor, once broken beyond repair, stood in the nursery watching two children laugh, knowing she had found not just a second chance, but a family built not on blood, but on choice. And yet, the greatest test still lay ahead. The truth did not end the danger. It only changed its shape. After the letters were sent, and the newspapers printed their careful stories, Thornfield Hall fell into a strange calm. The storm had broken, but the air still felt heavy, as if everyone was waiting to see what would rise from the wreckage. Eleanor learned quickly that honesty did not silence judgment. It only forced people to choose sides. Some neighbors avoided the estate entirely. Invitations stopped coming. Old friends of the Duke sent polite but distant replies. Yet others surprised them. Letters arrived praising the Duchess's compassion, the Duke's loyalty, and Catherine's final act of mercy. Eleanor read each one slowly, absorbing the words like medicine. Life inside the house grew steadier. Isabel began to toddle through the halls, fearless and curious. James followed close behind, slower but determined, his small hand always reaching for Eleanor's skirt when he lost his balance. Watching them, Eleanor felt something she had not felt since before the fever took Thomas and William. She felt hope without fear attached to it. The Duke changed too. The rigid man who once moved through Thornfield Hall like a ghost softened. He laughed more easily. He carried the children on his shoulders. He spoke openly with Eleanor about his fears, his guilt, and the years he had spent believing happiness was something meant for other people. "I lived as if joy were a betrayal," he told her one evening as they watched the children sleep. "As if smiling meant I had forgotten Catherine." "You honored her," Eleanor replied, "and she gave you permission to live." Winter passed, and spring followed. For the first time in years, Thornfield Hall hosted small gatherings again. Nothing grand, nothing meant to impress society. Only quiet dinners with those who chose kindness over judgment. Lady Hartwell remained close, sharp-tongued and fiercely protective. Eleanor grew to rely on her strength. Then came the question they had all avoided. "What will we tell James?" Lady Hartwell asked one afternoon, "when he is old enough to ask?" The Duke stared out the window for a long time before answering. "We will tell him the truth," he said, "but not yet. Let him be a child a little longer." Eleanor agreed. Childhood should not be burdened with secrets before it must be. Years passed gently. Isabel grew into a thoughtful, graceful girl, with her mother's calm spirit and Eleanor's quiet strength. James grew into a bright, curious boy, quick to laugh and fiercely loyal. Though whispers still followed the family, the children were shielded by love and consistency. 5 years after Eleanor arrived at Thornfield Hall, the moment she had long feared arrived. James came to her one afternoon, his small face serious, his voice trembling just slightly. "Mama," he said, "why do I not remember my real mother?" Quote. Eleanor's heart tightened, but she did not turn away. She gathered him into her arms, holding him as she had when he was an infant. "Because she loved you so much," Eleanor said gently, "that she made sure you would be safe, even if she could not stay." She told him the truth, carefully and softly, about Margaret, about Catherine, about promises and choices made out of love rather than shame. James listened without tears. When she finished, he rested his head against her chest. "I am glad it was you," he said. "I like our family." When the Duke joined them and understood what had passed, he knelt before his son, his voice steady. "You are mine," he said, "because I chose you, and because you chose us." James nodded, accepting the truth in the simple way only children can when they feel secure. From that day forward, the secret no longer weighed the same. It was no longer something hidden in fear, but a truth carried together. The years that followed were not free of struggle. There were moments of cruelty from the outside world, moments when old scandals resurfaced, moments when Eleanor wondered if she had asked too much of the children. But each challenge was met together, with honesty and loyalty. 10 years after Eleanor first arrived, Thornfield Hall hosted its first grand ball since the marriage. It was Isabel's coming out, and the house was filled with music and light. People came, some out of curiosity, some out of respect, some because time had softened their judgments. Isabel danced, radiant and confident. James watched proudly from the edge of the room. Eleanor stood beside the Duke, her hand in his, and felt the quiet certainty of belonging. Later that night, under the stars, the Duke asked her softly, "Do you ever regret it?" Quote. Eleanor smiled and shook her head. Not for a moment. Every loss led me here. He kissed her then, not with passion born of longing, but with the deep affection of two people who had survived together. Years later still, Eleanor would stand at the nursery window, now a schoolroom, watching Isabel and James laugh beneath the old oak tree. She would think back to the night of the storm, the hidden room, the crying baby, and the plea that had changed her life. She had found a second baby in the nursery. The Duke had begged her not to ask who the mother was. And in choosing love over answers, Eleanor had found something far greater than truth alone. She had found family. She had found purpose. She had found home. And that, she knew, was worth everything.